All right, so we've got you covered as far as the money part of retirement is concerned. But let's talk about some of the other aspects. A lot of people think that retirement is great. I mean, sure, you've got all this time on your hands, but you know what they say, the grass is always greener on the other side. When you're working and you're looking forward to retirement, you think that retired people are blessed. That isn't necessarily always the case. In fact, sometimes people are too used to a routine, to responsibility. How do they make that transition? It tends to get quite hard. So we're going to talk about mental wellness and how important it is to catch the red flags early as far as retirement is concerned. My next guest is Dr. Avantika Bhatia, who is a psychotherapist. Thank you so much, Doctor, for taking the time. I want to start by asking a very simple question. It has to do with the mentality that people have. How do people normally go through a change of this magnitude? Because it is, in fact, a very large change, even though people use platitudes to describe it, like it's a journey, it's an experience, you got to get used to it. How do people deal with it?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question, right? Because like with any change or with any transition, it can be an opportunity for tremendous growth as well as tremendous sort of challenges. And I think sometimes in our culture we try to overemphasize the growth pieces almost to the way of kind of negating the challenges that can happen. And one of the things that I have found people often talk about is just the sense of loss that they experience as a result of sort of retirement. And and this could be loss in so many sort of domains, just loss of not just your usual day, but loss of aspects of your identities depending on what you were doing at your work, whether that was leadership or some sort of an intellectual identity or just your social identities. And these are things that people don't often pay attention to, or they're not as attuned to. So that's something that can come up. And like with any loss, then there are repercussions in terms of how the person sort of manages these feelings, or how the person sort of sits with this sense of loss in their own sort of life.
Now, Doctor, I want to talk about the implications of this, because I would think that each person deals with this differently. It hits people differently. Some people enjoy it. There are some even that have talked about psychosomatic reactions, a tightening of the scalp, or maybe lack of sleep, or maybe even headaches that people experience. And that's all on account of the stress that they have to deal with because of the time that they have on their hands. What are the red flags, according to you, that people should bear in mind?
Yeah, I think we have to keep in mind, the age of the particular, population, or the person who is sort of retiring. And I think also keep in mind where they are in terms of their physical and mental health to begin with, because we know that there are going to be some concerns that might be physical. So in short, I think it helps to just have, if somebody is sort of noticing several kind of changes, whether those are physical or emotional, it helps to have some sort of a professional kind of a look at things to rule out certain things. But I also feel it could also have interact with things such as gender. We know that men in our country, and especially men of a particular generation, have really not had the space to sort of talk about how they're doing mentally or emotionally. So in those cases, I think we're more likely to see, like you're saying, some psychosomatic sort of concerns, headaches, dizziness, anger, irritability, um, shutting down people or feeling like disconnected from others. And with women, we might see other concerns in terms of sort of taking on more of a sense of responsibility, more guilt. And then, of course, we have like a whole range of psychological kind of concerns, which may be just feeling like a lack of meaning in one's life, listlessness, lack of energy, which I think, again, people are more able to speak to sometimes in the very traditional ways of looking at what's happening with mental health, like sadness or hopelessness or helplessness, and that those could also be there, of course. But I think sometimes within our population, people are more easily able to kind of pick up on the psychosomatic pieces rather than the psycho-emotional kind of pieces here.
I completely understand it. Some of these things would tend to be really hard to talk about, and there are things that also get left unsaid. You don't want certain things to cross the boundaries of your house. So I understand that. We are, of course, highlighting, Doctor, the more extreme cases. In a lot of cases, one would think that people transition easily as well. But what is a constructive way, according to you, of going about the process of transitioning to retirement?
Yeah, so I think, like you probably talked in the first segment, what is really helpful is preparation. And by preparation, I don't just mean sort of the logistics, which of course is useful, but I think from a psychological standpoint, also preparing for that sense of loss in terms of the identities that you might lose, right? So, I was an example that comes to mind is somebody may not really like their job and they might be really happy about the prospect of retirement and getting all this time. What they may not recognize is that even if they don't like their role, maybe there's certain aspects in that role that they were kind of used to that were fulfilling certain needs, right? Whether that's sort of social needs or even sort of intellectual needs or just having some structure to your day. And maybe the person sort of didn't realize the fact that these were important to them. And if they don't realize that these are important to them and then they're suddenly sort of lost without them or they feel that sense of loss, it can be really jarring. So I think some amount of work or, self-awareness, self-reflection on, here's what I'm not getting from my work and here is what I am getting from my work and how can I make sure that I build those needs in some form of way, so to kind of ease my transition or to continue after the transition, right? Some people might be very willing to give up certain sort of roles or identities because they no longer fit for them. But there might be others who might need that still, right? So actually, we do know that there's research that suggests that some sort of transition can be, or transitory roles can be really helpful for people, right? Whether you're kind of doing consulting kind of roles or volunteer roles, whatever's available. I would also say, I think it also speaks to sort of our systemic responsibility or societal responsibility to support people during or after their retirement, where they have opportunities to engage in these kind of roles once the retirement occurs, or even as they're planning for retirement.
Now, I think it's also important to talk about the support system. You mentioned earlier that it helps to talk about things. It's obviously important for those people around an individual to be open to allow the person to speak about the problems that they're facing. What should families and people that normally deal with that individual bear in mind?
Right. So, there are two things to this. There is a social support piece. And I think in general, we find with mental health research that just having connections, social connections that are deep and meaningful can be enormously sort of protective or beneficial for people. So there's the piece of trying to build that in some form or way in your life, no matter sort of what roles are ending and what roles are beginning during this period of transition. And then of course there is a social support piece where ideally one would imagine or want a situation where the family members or work colleagues or whoever, friends and family around the person, they are offering a space for the to understand what the person is going through. I think very often people in these sort of roles and transition roles can because they feel like nobody can really understand what's happening. Nobody can really understand this feeling of loss. There's a lot of pressure to now enjoy sort of this new phase of life. And I think people around the person can get restless at when they're feeling like, oh, the person is not enjoying this. Why not? You have all this free time. And I think a big piece here is sort of understanding, like I was saying, with any sort of transition, there will be the good pieces, there will be the bad pieces, and everybody will have like a different mix of these. But we need to create room for both. We need to help the person sort of feel like, if they're feeling sort of a sense of loss or they're struggling with certain things, that's okay, right? That there's no, like we think about with grief, there's no time period that this is the right amount of time and then you have to get okay. We have to help the person sort of sit with where they are, offer that sense of empathy or understanding. And I think that can be really helpful for the person as well.
All right, Doctor, thank you so much for taking the time. And you've highlighted quite a few areas, I think, that a lot of us will have to spend a little time and think about, because like you said, we tend to focus a lot on the positives rather than the holistic approach, and that tends to be the case when mental wellness is concerned as well, doesn't it?